the Krell Dominion had conquered 47 star systems in less than a century, and their warships were massive constructs of dark metal and pulsing energy cores that could reduce a planet's surface to molten slag within hours. Emperor Vokhtar himself commanded the invasion fleet from his flagship called the Eternal Dominance, and it was a dreadnought 3 kilometers in length that carried enough firepower to destroy entire worlds. When the fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system, Vokhtar surveyed the primitive blue world with satisfaction because his scouts had reported a species barely capable of faster-than-light travel and still confined to their own star system, fighting amongst themselves over resources and ideology. It would be a simple matter of landing troops and subduing the population and adding another world to the Dominion's ever-growing empire that stretched across multiple sectors of the galaxy. The Emperor stood in his command chamber, watching the holographic display show the small blue planet rotating peacefully in space, and he felt the familiar thrill of conquest that had driven him to expand the empire beyond what his ancestors had ever dreamed possible. His 4 eyes gleamed in the dim light as he observed his fleet arranging themselves in standard attack formation with 53 capital ships and hundreds of smaller craft all ready to unleash destruction upon the world below. The Krell had perfected the art of intimidation over decades of conquest, and they knew that most species surrendered quickly once they saw the overwhelming force arrayed against them. Vokhtar gestured to his communications officer with one of his 4 arms and gave the order that had brought so many worlds to their knees. The message went out across all frequencies in every language that Earth used, telling them to submit immediately or face total annihilation. The Emperor expected panic and desperate pleas for mercy, and perhaps a few futile military gestures before the inevitable capitulation, because that was how it always went with primitive species. But what they got instead was silence for exactly 90 seconds and then a single transmission from a facility somewhere in the mountains of North America. The voice was calm and almost casual when it responded, and the translator rendered it in standard Krell language. The human said they were negative on that surrender and told the fleet to stand by. Vokhtar felt a moment of confusion, because this was not the response he had anticipated from a species that should have been terrified. The voice belonged to Colonel Jake Morrison, who was the acting commander of a defense facility buried 2,000 feet below a mountain in Colorado. He sat in a reinforced bunker watching holographic displays light up with targeting solutions, while around him dozens of personnel worked with calm efficiency despite the unprecedented situation. Jake studied the alien formation on his screens and noted that they were arranged in what looked like a textbook offensive pattern, with the larger ships in the center and smaller craft on the flanks. He had spent 20 years in the military and another 5 preparing for exactly this scenario, because humanity had long suspected they were not alone in the universe. The defense grid that now surrounded Earth represented decades of preparation and trillions of dollars in resources poured into weapons systems that most civilians did not even know existed. Lieutenant Amy Peterson looked up from her console and reported that the alien ships were charging weapons and appeared to be preparing to fire on the satellite network. First, Jake asked how long until their own assets were in position, and Amy told him 30 seconds. He nodded and opened a channel to the Space Force command station that orbited above the planet, where Captain Danny Griffin waited with his finger hovering over the firing controls. Danny confirmed that he was ready and had a full spread of weapons locked onto the alien flagship. Jake told him to wait because he wanted the aliens to make the first move, and he wanted everything on record, so that future historians would know that Earth had not started this war. The Krell opened fire exactly as predicted, with streams of bright plasma lancing toward Earth's satellite network, and a dozen military and civilian satellites vanished in bursts of superheated metal and circuitry. The aliens probably thought they had struck the first blow in a war that would last weeks or even months. They had no idea that the war was already over before it had truly begun, because they had made the fatal mistake of underestimating the species they had chosen to attack. Humanity had learned hard lessons over centuries of warfare on their own planet, and they had applied those lessons to defending their world from external threats. The counterattack began before the light from the destroyed satellites had even faded from view. Orbital railgun platforms that had been hidden among the debris fields and disguised as legitimate satellites came online simultaneously across the entire network. These were not crude magnetic accelerators, but precision instruments capable of launching tungsten projectiles at a significant fraction of light speed. The first volley struck the eternal dominance before Bakhtar even realized his fleet was under attack, and 16 rounds punched through the dreadnought's shields, as if they were not even there, because the kinetic energy simply overwhelmed the defensive systems through pure physics. The projectiles tore through the ship's hull, and each impact released energy equivalent to a small nuclear weapon, creating massive explosions throughout the vessel. Bakhtar roared in confusion and anger as his ship shuddered and alarms wailed throughout the command chamber. His tactical officer shouted that they were taking fire from unknown weapons, and that shields were collapsing with hull breaches on multiple decks. The Emperor could not understand what was happening because they were supposed to have overwhelming technological superiority over this primitive world. Another salvo hit the eternal dominance, and this time the shots found the main reactor, causing it to go critical. Bakhtar had just enough time to realize that he had made a catastrophic mistake before the explosion consumed his flagship and everything within a kilometer radius of it. The massive dreadnought that had destroyed countless worlds broke apart in a brilliant flash of light that could be seen from Earth's surface. Back in the Colorado bunker, Jake watched the alien flagship disintegrate on his display and calmly reported Splash One before asking Danny for his status in orbit. Danny Griffin reported from his orbital position that the target was neutralized and that he was moving to engage secondary targets because the alien ships were sitting ducks in space. That was the fundamental truth of the situation, because the Krell had based their entire tactical doctrine on fighting species at roughly their own technological level. They expected shield warfare and energy weapons exchanges, and the careful dance of capital ships maneuvering for position over hours or even days. They were prepared for a certain kind of fight that followed rules they understood. But they were not prepared for humans who had spent decades developing weapons specifically designed to defeat energy shields through overwhelming kinetic force. The battle continued for another 8 minutes, and it was less of a battle and more of a systematic destruction of an enemy fleet that had no effective defense against Earth's weapons. Krell ships desperately tried to return fire, but their targeting systems could not track the small orbital platforms that darted between positions. Their plasma weapons were powerful but slow, and the human installations simply moved out of the way before the shots could connect. When the aliens attempted to flee back into hyperspace, they discovered that humanity had deployed field disruptors throughout the solar system that collapsed the dimensional pathways needed for faster-than-light travel. Captain Lisa Chen commanded a warship called the Defiance that was stationed near Mars as part of the Outer System Defense Network. She watched through her view screens as the last Krell cruiser broke apart under concentrated railgun fire from multiple platforms. Lisa reported to Jake that all enemy vessels were destroyed or disabled, and that she was reading 3 ships attempting to broadcast surrender codes. Jake leaned back in his chair and felt the tension drain from his shoulders as he accepted their surrender and ordered boarding teams to be ready because he wanted prisoners for intelligence gathering. Amy looked over at Jake with an expression that mixed relief and pride and reported that the total time from first shot to last hostile neutralized was 9 minutes and 43 seconds. Jake told her to make sure that went in the official report and to get him a communication line to the Secretary General, because the leader of Earth's government would want to know immediately that their world was secure. The defense grid had performed exactly as designed, and the decades of preparation had paid off in the most dramatic way possible. The 3 surviving Krell ships hung dead in space with their engines disabled and their crews huddled in whatever chambers still held atmosphere. Boarding teams from the Space Force approached cautiously in their armored suits despite the apparent surrender, because humans had learned long ago to never assume anything in combat situations. Lieutenant Kevin Barnes led the first team through the airlock of a Krell destroyer, and his suit's display painted the interior in shades of green and gray as he moved through twisted corridors filled with sparking systems and floating debris. Kevin told his team to stay sharp because they did not know the psychology of the aliens, and cornered beings might do anything when facing capture. The team moved in standard formation with weapons ready, and they found the Krell crew gathered in what appeared to be a cargo bay, with perhaps 40 individuals of varying sizes. The aliens were tall at easily 7 feet with chitinous armor plating covering their bodies, and too many joints in their limbs that made them look dangerous even in defeat. One of them stepped forward wearing some kind of translator device that crackled to life with static before producing words in English. The Krell said that they surrendered and that they did not know what they were facing and begged for mercy. Kevin kept his weapon trained on the speaker but did not fire because his orders were to capture prisoners if possible. He asked what they meant about not knowing, and the alien responded with words that would echo through intelligence briefings for weeks to come. The Krell said they did not know that humans were apex predators, and that they were like the ancient ones that had been warned about in old records. The prisoners were secured and transported to holding facilities in orbit where they could be questioned safely. On Earth, the governments of all nations called emergency sessions to discuss what had just happened and what it meant for humanity's future. The attack had unified the planet in a way that decades of diplomacy had failed to achieve, because the threat from outside had made all internal conflicts seem small and meaningless. Secretary General Maria Santos addressed the world from the United Nations building and assured everyone that Earth was safe and that the defense systems had performed flawlessly. Dr. Helen Cooper was a xenopsychologist who had spent her career studying theoretical alien behavior, and now she sat in a stark interrogation room aboard an orbital station called Unity 7 facing a real alien for the first time. The Krell commander was named Thalkor, and he had been surprisingly cooperative once he realized that humans were not going to immediately execute their prisoners. Helen asked him why the Empire had thought Earth would be easy to conquer when they had clearly underestimated human capabilities. Thalkor explained through his translator that they scouted worlds for technology level and military capability before attacking. Earth had only recently achieved fusion power and had a minimal space presence, so by all their metrics, it should have been a developing world that posed no real threat. But they had missed something fundamental about human nature that made all their calculations meaningless. Helen asked what they had missed, and Thalkor responded that they did not understand that humans were fundamentally different from the peaceful species that the Empire had conquered before. The alien explained that the other species in their empire had reached the stars through cooperation and scientific pursuit, and they only built weapons when forced to do so. Humans were different because they reached space despite their violent nature rather than overcoming it first. Every tool that humans created was considered first as a potential weapon, and this made them disturbing to encounter. Helen could not entirely argue with that assessment because human history was indeed written in blood and conflict, and even their greatest achievements often came from military research programs. Helen asked Thalkor about the ancient ones he had mentioned and what they had to do with humanity's nature. The Krell commander shifted in his chair and explained that the Empire was old, but they had found ruins of civilizations that were far older, scattered throughout the galaxy. These ancient species had conquered entire galaxies, perhaps, and they had left warnings carved in neutronium where the messages would survive the death of stars themselves. The warnings spoke about predator species that were born in violence and shaped by competition, and who turned their aggression outward once they reached the stars and became a threat to all peaceful civilizations. Thalkor fixed his 4 eyes on Helen and said that he knew humans were one of these predator species because the Empire had attacked Earth with a fleet that had destroyed worlds before. Yet humanity had eliminated that fleet in less time than it took to conduct a standard military briefing. The weapons and tactics and readiness all pointed to a species that had been waiting for someone to attack them. Helen did not confirm or deny the accusation, because the truth was more complicated than the alien understood. Humanity had not wanted war, but they had certainly prepared for it with the same thoroughness they applied to everything else. The defense grid and orbital platforms and new generation warships under construction all represented a massive investment of resources based on a simple premise that Earth's leaders had accepted decades ago. That premise was that humanity was not alone in the universe, and that not everything out there would be friendly when first contact finally came. Better to have weapons and not need them than to need them and not have them. Thalkor asked what would happen now and whether humans would destroy the Krell Empire and come for their homeworld seeking revenge. Helen leaned forward and told him that what happened next depended entirely on what the Empire chose to do. If they were smart, they would leave Earth alone and there would be no quarrel between their species. But if they sent another fleet or made any aggressive moves, then humanity would respond with overwhelming force. She did not elaborate on what that force might look like, but the implication was clear enough. The interrogation continued for several hours as Helen extracted information about Krell territory, and military capabilities and the locations of their major worlds. 3 weeks after the failed invasion of small Krell, courier ship emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the solar system. It was unarmed and broadcasting surrender codes on every frequency available. Danny Griffin, who now commanded a patrol group near Neptune, intercepted the vessel personally. He hailed the ship and asked them to state their intentions clearly. The response came immediately from someone who identified himself as Diplomatic Courier Velkith of the Krell Dominion, carrying a message from their ruling council to the leaders of Earth. Danny exchanged glances with his tactical officer, Chris Palmer, and they agreed that the ship appeared to be exactly what it claimed to be, with no weapons and no escort. Danny granted the request for safe passage but warned that any unexpected maneuvers would be considered hostile and met with immediate destruction. The courier was escorted to Unity 7 orbital station, under careful watch by a full squadron of human warships. Velkith turned out to be older than most of the Krell, prisoners with scarred armor plating, and what the translators rendered as a gravelly voice that spoke of long experience. The alien diplomat was brought to a conference room where Maria Santos waited with a small delegation of Earth's most important leaders. Maria studied the Krell carefully as it settled into a reinforced chair that had been built to accommodate its size. She told Velkith that he had come a long way to deliver this message and asked to hear it. The diplomat activated a holographic display showing the territory claimed by the Krell Empire, which was vast and covered dozens of star systems. He explained that the ruling council had reviewed what he carefully called the incident at Earth, and that Emperor Vokhtar had acted without full intelligence about what he was facing. Velkith said that Vokhtar had paid for his mistake with his life when the Eternal Dominance was destroyed. The council had elected not to seek revenge for the destruction of the invasion fleet, even though many voices had called for immediate retaliation. Maria responded with obvious sarcasm that this was very magnanimous of them. The diplomat asked her to understand that the decision had not been reached easily, because the Empire had never suffered such a complete defeat in living memory. There were many who wanted to send the full armada to make an example of Earth and prove that the Empire was still strong. Maria asked how Velkith had managed to convince the council otherwise, and the alien explained that he had told them the truth about what humanity represented. The hologram shifted to show ancient ruins scattered across multiple worlds. The diplomat said that throughout the galaxy there were warnings left by civilizations that had existed millions of years ago. Most species dismissed these warnings as myths and cautionary tales, but some scholars like himself had studied them seriously. The warnings spoke of predator civilizations born in violence, who spread through the stars like wildfire once they achieved the ability to travel between worlds. Velkith said that humanity was clearly one of these predator species and that the evidence was overwhelming. In the 47 worlds that the Empire had conquered, they had never faced organized resistance because those species only built weapons after the Krell arrived. But Earth had weapons waiting and an entire philosophy of warfare that permeated human culture. The diplomat said he had spent 3 weeks studying Earth's history and had learned about the world wars and the Cold War doctrine of mutually assured destruction. He pointed out that humans had split the atom and immediately weaponized it before using it for peaceful purposes. Maria felt uncomfortable hearing her species described this way, but she could not entirely deny the accuracy of the assessment. Humanity was young by galactic standards, and yet they had refined warfare to a degree that most civilizations never reached even after thousands of years. She asked what the council wanted from Earth, and Velkith responded that they wanted peace through an immediate non-aggression pact. The Empire would maintain a border of 5 light years from the solar system and would not approach Earth or any human vessels unless specifically invited. In return, they asked that humanity respect Krell territory and not expand toward their core worlds. Maria asked what would happen if Earth refused. This offer and Velkith's tone made clear that refusal would be catastrophic for the Empire. He said that the Krell would fortify every world within 100 light years and pray that human expansion took them in a different direction. They were not fools, and they understood that they could not defeat Earth in a conventional war. Their only hope would be to delay humanity long enough to evacuate civilian populations before their worlds were conquered. It was a stunning admission from a species that had built an empire through conquest and intimidation. Maria looked to her advisors and saw her own thoughts reflected in their faces because they had won the battle. But the galaxy had just become much more complicated than anyone had imagined. She told Velkith that Earth would need to discuss his proposal with all the governments represented in the Planetary Alliance, but that she could share their basic position. Humanity wanted peace but would defend itself without hesitation, and they had not asked to be attacked in the first place. The diplomat said he understood completely, and that the Council was prepared to offer reparations for the unprovoked attack. These reparations could include technology transfers and resource rights, and perhaps even assistance in fortifying the outer solar system against other potential threats. Maria felt a chill at those last words and asked what other threats Velkith was referring to. The alien explained that the Krell Empire was vast, but they were not the only major power in this region of space. If word spread about what had happened at Earth, then other species would become curious, and some might be hostile while others might seek to test human strength for themselves. Velkith said that the galaxy was not a safe place and that there were worse things out there than the Krell. Maria absorbed this information and felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on her shoulders. Earth had just announced its presence to the universe in the most dramatic way possible by destroying an invasion fleet in minutes. There was no going back to the comfortable isolation they had enjoyed before. The diplomat was offered quarters aboard Unity 7 as a guest while the negotiations continued, and over the following weeks the terms of the peace treaty were hammered out in careful detail. The Krell agreed to share star charts showing the locations of other civilizations and potential threats near Earth's region of space. They also provided technical information about their shield technology and faster-than-light drives, though the humans quickly realized that much of this technology was actually inferior to what Earth had already developed independently. The Empire had relied on conquering other species and taking their technology, rather than innovating themselves. In return, Earth agreed to respect the 5-light-year buffer zone, and to not interfere with Krell internal affairs unless invited. One of the more interesting parts of the negotiation involved the fate of the Krell prisoners still held in Earth's facilities. Velkith requested their return, and Maria agreed on the condition that they be allowed to stay if they chose to do so. Several of the prisoners did choose to remain on Earth as part of a new program to facilitate cultural exchange between the species. Thalcor was among those who stayed because he was fascinated by human society and wanted to understand the species that had defeated his empire so completely. 6 months after the battle, Commander Kate Sullivan stood on the observation deck of a newly commissioned ship called the Valiant, watching Earth slowly rotate below her position. The vessel represented humanity's next generation of spacecraft, and it was not a defensive platform or patrol ship, but a true exploration vessel designed to venture beyond the solar system into the wider galaxy. Kate had been chosen to lead the first mission into what the diplomats now called the Frontier, which was a region of space claimed by no major power but dotted with independent colonies and minor civilizations. It was a test mission that would be as much about diplomacy as exploration, and Kate felt the enormous weight of responsibility. She had been a military officer for 15 years and had commanded patrol ships in the outer system, but this was different. Every decision she made would reflect on all of humanity and could affect how other species viewed Earth for generations to come. Dr. Paul Martinez floated up beside her in the zero-gravity observation pod and asked what she was thinking. About Kate said she was wondering if humanity was ready to go out into the galaxy and make contact with species who had probably heard about the Krell invasion. Some of them would be scared of humans and would see them as dangerous predators. Paul responded that some of them should be scared because there were genuine threats out there like pirates and raiders and worse. If hostile species saw Earth as an easy target, they would try the same thing the Krell had attempted. Kate asked what would happen if peaceful species saw humans as monsters. Paul told her that humanity would prove them wrong by showing that they were more than just warriors. He said he knew the narrative that had developed over the past months about humanity being warlike and violent and predatory. But that was not the whole story, and Kate knew it as well as he did. The alien perspective had been skewed by the circumstances of first contact, because what they saw was Earth's military might and not its art or culture or capacity for compassion. The challenge now was showing the universe that humans had many sides to their nature. Paul mentioned that he had read something interesting the day before in a message from one of the Krell prisoners. The alien had been talking to his guards and asking questions about Earth's history, and specifically about human heroes. The guards had told him everything, including stories about warriors, but also about peace activists and scientists who dedicated their lives to curing diseases. They spoke of artists who created beauty for its own sake and ordinary people who risked everything to save strangers. The Krell prisoner had responded with an observation that Paul found profound. He said the alien had suggested that maybe the warnings left by the Ancient Ones were incomplete, that predator species were not just dangerous but necessary, that a universe full of peaceful sheep needed a few wolves to keep worse things at bay. Kate considered this idea carefully because there was truth in it, even if it was a bit self-serving. The Krell had conquered dozens of worlds precisely because those worlds were not ready to fight back. How many other peaceful species were out there right now, vulnerable to the next empire that decided to expand its territory? The intercom interrupted their conversation with a message that Kate was needed on the bridge because they were receiving final departure authorization from Earth Command. Kate took one last look at her homeworld and felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension about what lay ahead. She pushed off toward the exit, and Paul called after her, asking what they should do if they ran into trouble that could not be solved with diplomacy. Kate paused at the hatch and smiled slightly, before responding that they would remind any threats what had happened to the Krell fleet, but that they would do it politely, of course. The Valiant departed Earth orbit 6 hours later, carrying a crew of 200 humans into the unknown regions beyond the solar system. Behind them, the defense grid remained on full alert with orbital platforms tracking every vessel that approached within scanning range. Construction continued on new ships and new weapon systems and new defensive installations, because humanity had learned the most important lesson the universe could teach. That lesson was to hope for peace but prepare for war, because the galaxy was a dangerous place filled with species that might not have humanity's best interests at heart. The Krell invasion had lasted just minutes, but its impact would echo through the centuries to come. Earth had announced itself to the wider galactic community, not with a message of greeting or a peaceful overture, but with a demonstration of overwhelming military power. Some species would fear humanity for what they had done, and others would respect them for their strength. A few might even seek their protection against threats that they could not handle alone. But one thing was absolutely certain, and that was that no one would ever make the mistake of thinking humanity was easy prey again. In the ruins of the eternal dominance that still drifted in the cold void of space near Earth's orbit, a salvage team from Unity 7 worked carefully to recover data cores and technology. Lieutenant Karen Foster was first to enter what had been the Emperor's private chambers, and her suit lights cut through the darkness, revealing twisted metal and floating debris. She found something etched into the bulkhead in what their translators identified as an old form of Krell script. It was a message that Vaktar must have carved in his final moments, perhaps thinking it would be found by his own people as a warning. The message read that whoever found it should not fight the humans and should not provoke them and should not test them under any circumstances. It said that humans were what the Ancient Ones had warned about, and that they were the fire that burns in the dark, consuming everything in its path. Karen recorded the message and continued with her salvage work, but she could not shake the feeling of unease that the words left in her mind. Was that really what humanity was destined to be in the galaxy? A consuming fire that destroyed everything it touched? Or maybe she thought humans could be the torch that other species gathered around for warmth and safety. Maybe the fire only burned hot for those who threatened the light. She supposed that time would tell because the galaxy was vast beyond imagination, and humanity's story was just beginning. One chapter had closed, written in the wreckage of an empire that learned too late that Earth was not defenseless. But many more chapters lay ahead, and the choices that humans made in the coming years would determine what kind of power they became. The Valiant traveled for 3 weeks before making its first contact with an alien civilization. They encountered a small trading outpost run by a species called the Neelan, who were insectoid creatures standing about 4 feet tall. The Neelan had heard rumors about what happened to the Krell fleet, and they were understandably nervous when a human warship appeared in their system. Kate approached the situation carefully and made sure her first communication emphasized peaceful intentions and a desire for trade and cultural exchange. The Neelan administrator was named Clictor, and he agreed to meet with Kate. aboard the trading station after extensive security arrangements were made. The meeting went better than expected because Kliktor was curious about humans despite his initial fear. He asked many questions about Earth and its culture, and seemed surprised by how much humans valued art and music and literature, alongside their obvious military capabilities. By the end of the meeting, a tentative trade agreement had been reached, and the Neelan agreed to share information about other species in the region. Kate learned that the frontier was home to dozens of minor civilizations who had existed in the shadow of the Krell Empire for generations. Many of them paid tribute to the Krell to avoid being conquered outright. Now that the Empire had been humbled, there was uncertainty about what would happen next. Some species saw it as an opportunity for independence, while others worried about power vacuums and what might fill them. Kate assured Kliktor that Earth had no interest in building an empire and only wanted peaceful relations with their neighbors. The mission continued for 6 months as the Valiant visited system after system, making contact with new species and gathering information. Some encounters were friendly and others were tense, but Kate and her crew handled each situation with patience and professionalism. They discovered that humanity's reputation had spread quickly through the frontier, and reactions varied widely. Some species wanted nothing to do with the dangerous newcomers, while others sought alliances and protection. Kate documented everything carefully, knowing that her reports would shape Earth's foreign policy for decades back. On Earth, the governments continued their debates about how to handle humanity's new position in galactic affairs. Some leaders argued for aggressive expansion to secure resources and territory before other powers could challenge them. Others advocated for a more measured approach focused on building alliances and establishing Earth as a trustworthy partner. The debate was ongoing and passionate because everyone understood that the decisions made now would affect humanity's future for generations. Jake Morrison had been promoted to general and given command of the entire Soul Defense Network. He spent his days coordinating patrols and maintaining the weapon systems that had saved Earth from conquest. But he also thought about the future and what kind of galaxy he wanted to leave for his children. He had seen war up close and knew its costs even when victory came easily. He hoped that humanity could find a way to be strong without being cruel, and to be feared without being hated. The galaxy watched and waited to see what kind of power humanity would become. The ancient warning spoke of predator species that consumed everything in their path, but they also hinted at something else. That sometimes the predators were necessary to maintain balance and to protect the weak from even greater threats. Humanity stood at a crossroads, with the choice to prove the warnings right or to forge a new path that the ancient ones had never imagined. On the frontier, the Valiant discovered evidence of a new threat that made both humans and their alien contacts nervous. There were reports of ships disappearing near the edge of known space, and rumors of something massive moving through the void. Kate sent her findings back to Earth and requested additional ships for a proper investigation. The response came quickly with orders to proceed carefully, but to gather as much information as possible about this potential threat. As humanity prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead, they did so with the confidence that came from proven strength. They had faced the Krell Empire and won decisively. They had established themselves as a power to be respected in the galaxy, but they also carried the responsibility of deciding what kind of power they would be and whether they would use their strength to protect or to dominate. The story of humanity among the stars was only beginning, and the ending had yet to be written.